Many wonderful, sincere believers who have been observing the biblical holy days for years and who have come out and who have stopped observing the pagan holidays with the pagan origins to them and finding out more accurate the timing of his appointed times. Many have become burnt out on the biblical calendar study, learning, research, and restoration of the accuracy, as if by doing so, yes, many have lost the faith, have departed, have become confused, a lot of divisions. And well, I've heard similarly with even Christians at work. I remember one time and having lunch with one, he said, well, Russ, I was told that if I study the Bible too much, I'll lose my faith. And so too much learning causes divisions and upsets and separations, and then people end up getting discouraged and even just give up, throw in the towel, as a boxer throws in the white towel, right? When the coach will even, when they says, okay, we've been beat up too much, let's give up on the fight. Well, we don't want to do that, of course. We want to continue learning and growing and improving as we go, and realize, always remember that because there is an author of confusion, often there's information overload or too much information, inaccurate information for that matter. And so it's hard to find or know what is really the truth sometimes. In regard to the calendar, there's too many calendars out there to choose from, all going to the scriptures, interpreting from the scriptures logically, and causing divisions, excommunications, or simply separations of people too uncomfortable to be together, and a lack of what we say in Greek, the Greek word agape, the kind of love that he has for us and as we should have for one another and back toward him, which goes deeper than brotherly love and romantic human forms of love. This kind of love is superior, the love that he has for us. It does surpass knowledge and understanding, but we don't want to ditch it either. So I like to encourage people not to give up on learning and growing and weeding out the inaccuracies, the false teachings that don't bring compliance with our holy scriptures. Because our adversaries, the adversaries of the Most High, well, they are very happy when we become lukewarm or cold. You know, when there's lawlessness and Torahlessness, and even people who are trying to observe it, well, the love of many do wax cold when there's too much of a lack of his kind of love and patience and tolerance, but also learning and growing together for those who are sincere and have the right hearts and minds, including burned out believers, people who are burned out from seeking first that kingdom, seeking and learning more accurately, even in regarding to the true, great biblical calendar, when he is sovereign over time. He makes days holy. We don't have that authority to. The Jewish people may claim to, and the Christians may claim to, leaderships of the past. Well, if they depart from the scriptures and the accuracies of that, and we have enough information, well, I propose that only he has authority. We don't have any authority to make anything holy. And so this isn't a topic that, well, it might be a little topic for some people. And, well, doesn't he tell us that those who teach and observe the least of the commandments, maybe I propose even truth and accuracy and obeying him a little bit more accurately here and there, those who learn and grow in it will be great in his eyes and be used in great ways in his eyes to help others in the future. So, as I've addressed in my previous videos in this playlist series, that I'm going to do a little bit of review, but go forward with this final video as far as I'm concerned at this present time as I'm recording. This might be the last video in this playlist series. But for over 2,000 years, the religious Jewish people have been using the Babylonian calendar month names, as surprising as that is, for dating much of their historical information, long after the Babylonian Empire was conquered by the Persians and followed by the Greeks, the Roman Empire, which overtook the Persians. And we still see 7 Babylonian month names in the written Tanakh, aka the Old Testament. And also the books of the Maccabees, they included Babylonian month names, even as the Greek Alexandrian Empire was conquering and had another calendar coming along before the Julian. The Maccabees did not switch to those month names. They kept the Babylonian month names. And the Persians didn't see any reason to change those month names either, and adopted what they felt was best for them at the time and brought better for their empire and their kingdom. But the corruption brought it down, of course, as it always does. Every empire gets brought down eventually if they don't turn to Him, the Most High. Why would the religious Jewish people still hold on to Babylonian month names? Why? That is a big question. We should ask Him, and we should research and learn to understand why. As I also exposed in with good evidence in this playlist series, in the previous 1, 2, and 3, and now this is part 4, that since 499 BCE, or BC if you prefer to call it that, until the destruction of the Second Jerusalem Temple, that's almost 600 years, around 575 to be more precise, that both the Babylonian calendar and the religious Jewish people, we call it all of Judaism during that almost 600-year time period, well, they both, as I've pointed out, number one, they began their years with the first visible crescent moon after the vernal spring equinox, or even if it landed right on the spring equinox, but never before, never began Nisan 1 before the vernal equinox. And they also began their months in parallel with the first visible crescent. And the Babylonians, they were more in the Iraq, what we call modern day Iraq, and not in Jerusalem or Israel, but the Jewish people observed it from the Holy Land when they had it, when they were there. But most of the biblical feast keepers, they still don't know. Some do, and they don't think it's important because of all the divisions it causes, but most people probably still don't know that the Orthodox Jewish calendar today, the common Jewish calendar today in Judaism in general, has changed. Both those ways, both those methods of when to begin a month and when to begin a year, and it's changed over the past 2,000 years since the destruction of that Second Temple in 70 CE. And so in other words, they usually, not always, sometimes they do, but usually they don't begin their months with the first visible crescent that you'll see in the western horizon after sunset. And rather they go by this dark moon, this dark conjunction moon that can last up to 3 days. And on the third day, usually that crescent appears after sunset. After it disappears, there's that dark phase where nobody on Earth with human eyes can see the crescent of the moon. And so that's for almost 2,000 years. This information has become what I say is kind of lost in some ways. The ancient Babylonian astronomy experts, well, those who could read that Akkadian language that they wrote down their information on clay tablets, there's no Babylonian empire for over 2,500 years. The Persians, as we know, took down the Babylonian Empire. And Daniel, knowing the book of Daniel, shows that he served 4 different leaders, and not all Babylonian, but when the Persians also took over. But the Persians, who conquered that, they maintained the same calendar system and month names. But the astronomers, the Babylonian ones, Well, they still kept going. They didn't completely get annihilated. And there were still astronomers that was maintaining that and writing on clay tablets all the way up until just a little bit past the destruction of that second Jerusalem temple. But as a result of all this information and history, the Babylonian calendar was not well known to the Jewish people. The Aaronic priests knew it, but the Jewish changes that came later on, since the destruction of the temple, their own calendar system went through some changes over the next centuries. And so this is what I also title as become lost information, identity crisis, or you can also call it calendar identity crisis, if I may word it that way, to the religious Jewish people and even Christianity, as they wanted to understand the biblical calendar by the 3rd and 4th century. And you know, there was you know, basically lost information. I don't want to go off on a tangent too much. It'd be a lot of information I could provide in regard to that. But for different reasons, both Christianity and Judaism had lost certain information. In other words, how could such information not be known to humanity from the destruction of the Second Temple until the 20th century, the mid-20th centuries, when this understanding of how the Babylonian calendar worked, and for over 700 years for that matter, and some changes that even the Babylonians made from 499 BCE. Well, those are hard questions to answer. It takes a certain amount of research. And as I partially answered earlier in this introduction, and as earlier in this playlist series with some more detail and some sources for you to go and learn more detail if you're interested in such exhaustive research, but very few people understand, on this earth currently, can answer correctly with enough accurate information. And so that's the purpose of this video, is also to help educate and help people to understand the accurate information, to provide more answers. And well, that's what part 4 is here for, is to provide more answers and sharing why and how all this could happen and what we can do with it going forward as well. So I'll begin sharing my screen with you now again. And even if you haven't watched parts 1, 2, and 3, this topic is the calendar identity crisis. Yes, it is a crisis because of all the different biblical calendars proposed as the true biblical calendar are out there and causing so much confusion that it is a crisis to know which one is accurate. When are the appointed times that he is appointed? How do we find out the accuracies of all that? To know the anniversaries of great things in the past, and to see and to know when greater things will happen in the future, as all these things are just a shadow of greater things to come than what has happened in the past. So the playlist series has to do with the Creator's calendar, this Babylonian calendar being like a missing connection or like a missing link. And as I can also subtitle, lost information until the 20th century. How could that happen? That sounds almost unbelievable. A lot of people have claimed that with other doctrines like the gospel or this or the holy name and so forth. But could that be true in the Babylonian calendar? I say yes. This is what we have, and this is what part 4 is going to express, because the most credible archaeology, history, and detailed evidence that I have found is provided within Herb Selinsky's free online PDF biblical calendar documents. And there's 2 primary ones here that I'll be taking from the Treatise on the Biblical Calendar and Beginning of the Biblical Year, 2nd edition, 2018. I've been doing my research on this for over 20 years. And Herb Selinsky, I met him in 2014 at a Feast of Sukkot. He's helped me learn more, and a lot of his information has been in alignment with a lot of things I've studied, and he's helped me become more accurate with this. So here's his URL, thebiblicalcalendar.org, and I'll click on it. You can see I don't know if you can see my screen if you zoom it out, but you'll see a lot of different topics he's written on for the calendar. Historical departure from the biblical calendar. If you're interested in the history and the historical evidence of that, he goes into detail with that. Here we have treatise on the biblical calendar. Barley, if you're having confusion on should we go by the barley, how important is the barley to begin this year, he's got, you know, over 100 pages on that alone, that topic alone. Scrolling down here on that web page, but going down here, you'll see when does a biblical year begin? And any of these downloads are PDFs, and you don't have to download them. You can just read them right off. Here I have here that I'll be quoting through later in this video, beginning of the biblical year, second edition, July 27th, 2018. And a lot of interesting in this table of contents. If you're interested in looking at that, that's included with this. But here we have biblical key to the calendar is Genesis 1, 14 through 18. Yes, that is key and foundation, as I've addressed. Uses of the appointed times. How is that used? Appointed times is often translated the word moed, the Hebrew word. Stars in Genesis 1:16. He addresses that and the zodiac, and he's covered a lot of topics. I'm condensing more of that so that there's not quite so much information, but it's here if you want that more information. So moving down my screen here to summarize, always keeping in mind that there's 7 Babylonian month names in the Tanakh, and how can that be paralleled with the biblical calendar? Why would inspired prophets still be using these month names with absolute religious freedom? Well, let's go down here to summarize for the purposes of this video. In that article, the beginning of the biblical year, Herb Selinsky, second edition. I'll begin quoting him here from page 20, top of page 22 in chapter 13. He says, we understand how the ancient Babylonian calendar worked because of their eclipse records agree with modern computer simulation data for those eclipses. There are hundreds of eclipse records from the ancient Babylon preserved on clay tablets between the years 747 BCE and the 1st century. That's CE or AD, however you prefer. A little less than 200 of them also have the time of day. So not only do they have the dates of these eclipses, but the time of day based upon their water clocks. They use these ancient water clocks. They didn't have electricity or the clocks we use today. Remember, these is more than 2,000 years ago. So they had some sophisticated water clocks that they used. And using computers and the formulas of astronomy to compute the time of those eclipses that were time-stamped by the ancient astronomers, you know, time-stamped by these in these clay tablets, so to speak. Herb Selinsky wrote, we know how the ancient Babylonian calendar worked. Now the rest of this text is actually the next paragraph. I've changed the color of it. I didn't have room for this JPEG here. But it says here, from 499 BCE until the Babylonian calendar's last recorded year of 75 CE, its first day of the first month did not begin before the vernal equinox. So here it is, for about 576 years. Never once did Nisan 1 land even one day before the spring equinox, also known as, more technically known as the vernal equinox. Moving down here, as Herb Selinsky has researched thoroughly and preserved valuable, priceless historical archaeological facts as supportive to Torah observant calendar evidence for those of us who are interested today. You can find out more from Herb Selinsky's research on this. I'm summarizing it for you, putting it in bullet points here. From about 1940 is when Otto Neugebauer departed Germany due to Adolf Hitler's putting heat. He put heat onto the Jewish scholars in Germany. He knew the astronomer Olaf Pedersen from Denmark and immediately joined him there, where he found more refuge and safety. At that time, Neugebauer was already recognized as the world's leading authority on the history of ancient astronomy, not just the Babylonians, but just the whole topic of ancient astronomers. It did not take long for Brown University here in the United States to offer him, Neugebauer, a full professorship. So, of course, he moved to Providence, Rhode Island, the city of Brown University. So Neugebauer retired from Brown University sometime around 1986. So for over 40 years, he was working there and working on all these different calendars, not just the Babylonians, but the Egyptians and the Roman calendars, and so forth, as I'll get to a little bit later. So more about what he did at Brown University will be exposed later in this video, so hold tight if you're still listening, and I hope you're still interested to continue with me here. But about 40 years here of exhaustive research was put into ancient astronomy, archaeology, language translations, and brilliant mathematical calculations. During that time, Abraham Sachs was the leading scholar in the Akkadian language. This is what the clay tablets were written in by the Babylonians, for translating the Babylonian tablets. And he was working at the University of Chicago. So Neugebauer convinced Sachs, Abraham there, that he should leave the University of Chicago and join him at Brown University to help him more accurately piece together Babylonian astronomy. So Neugebauer had already learned Egyptian hieroglyphics and some of the Akkadian language, but he wasn't such an expert. He wasn't the leading expert on the Akkadian language as Abraham Sachs was, so he needed him to team up together. And Neugebauer's PhD dissertation was in ancient Egyptian mathematics from the original sources. Now, after Sachs joined Neugebauer at Brown University, Neugebauer went to work to convince Richard A. Parker to also leave the University of Chicago and join his team. Parker was the leading authority on translating Egyptian hieroglyphics. So it wasn't just Neugebauer on his own opinions. They had good checks and balances with their own scholarship here, creating a superior team of scholars. And notice, I don't think that's because they were religious or trying to restore any ancient calendar system. That's true according to the Bible, but simply they wanted to know all these things, how the Egyptians did it, how the Romans did it, how the Babylonians did it, and so forth. But Neugebauer wanted Parker to write a full study on ancient Egyptian astronomical texts, and this was published in 3 volumes. Parker also wrote a volume on the ancient Egyptian calendars. So like I said, it's good non-biased information. They weren't just had a religious agenda here, like a lot of us who just want to know the true calendar to keep the biblical holy days at their appointed times and know when he made them holy so we can keep them holy more accurately as we go and as we learn. But it was Sachs with Neugebauer who published several volumes with translation of many Babylonian astronomical texts on those clay tablets. So Neugebauer understood all the mathematics behind the Babylonian computations. So Neugebauer knew the mathematics. Abraham Sachs knew how to interpret the Akkadian language, more of an expert in that regard, more specialized. So Neugebauer also used this mathematics in 1975 in his 3-volume HAMA, H-A-M-A, which is an acronym for History of Ancient Mathematical Astronomy. The data of the Babylonian new moons that appears in the reference work by Parker and here's Duberstein, another scholar that teamed up with him, is primarily based upon the Akkadian translation into English done by Abraham Sachs, along with the mathematics supplied by Neugebauer. But then it was put into book form using a collaboration from Parker and Duberstein, all working at Brown University. So Neugebauer, Sachs, Parker, Duberstein, and the other scholars at Brown University collaborated to achieve greater understanding in Babylonian astronomy, as well as with the Egyptians. And in case of those you want more source information, there are 2 other ancient astronomy elite scholar references that have made a summary of statements of Nisan 1 to begin with the vernal equinox plus the first visible crescent new moon. That's what makes the New Year's Day. That was always determining Nisan 1 from 499 BC onwards. So remember, so I listed here, and I could copy and paste, give anyone out there upon request via email. You can contact me or make a comment on this video here, and I can give you more information there from other scholarship research. And of course, it's all provided from Herb Selinsky, who's gone to all these sources more personally himself and dug them out from different libraries as he studied this topic, Herb Selinsky, since 1967. And so for over 50 years, you know, he's been just learning and growing up in Judaism. He had access to yeshiva schools and archives and leading libraries of Orthodox Judaism, as well as secular universities. And I've got some of my information from Stanford University and UC Davis here in California, from understanding even just the last 2,000 years of Jewish history and what has been admitted and changed regarding the biblical calendar. So as a result of all the needed work done by Neugebauer, Sachs, and the other ancient astronomy scholars, along with a modern astronomical software program, Herb Selinsky has been able to target the time period of Nehemiah, you know, the one who wrote the book, inspired by the Most High, of course, the book of Nehemiah, and Ezra, the high priest of that first Second Temple restoration, and getting it going with Nehemiah, the governor, all given that freedom by the Persians, as most of you know the story. But due to their timing of faithful restoration of this Second Temple and their calendar system, which utilized Babylonian month names with absolute freedom of religion and cleansing of everything pagan. As a reminder, as I've brought out in previous videos, Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 30, Nehemiah says, I cleanse them of everything pagan. And yet you go back to Nisan 2:1, he uses the month of Nisan, not Aviv. And he uses other Babylonian month names within, you know, his books. So it's important to remember that information. If we go to page 301, this is Herb Selinsky's PDF document titled Treatise on the Biblical Calendar. It's provided on his website, as I showed you earlier in the video. There are 3 times in this 100-year time period, when the time period overlapping Nehemiah and Ezra, when the day prior to the vernal equinox was a new moon day. And all 3 times this new moon day began an intercalary month. That's a month added beyond the 12 normal months, called the second Adar, kind of like an Adar A. Adar B is considered a 13th month. And these dates I've highlighted below. I've highlighted in red when it happened, like a day or so before the spring equinox, and there was a 13th month. And the ones in yellow there's 3 of them during this 100 periods where the new moon was on the same day. Notice this here on March 26, 446 BCE. The new moon was sighted by the astronomers on March 26, and that's also Nisan 1. So it's not adding a 13th month there. You have there Nisan 1. And also on March 26 and 484 BCE, the new moon was sighted by the astronomers on March 26. Now back then, the spring equinox was on March 26, and I don't want to get into a whole complicated topic of the precession of the equinoxes, which is today in our modern times, it's right around March 20th. And as time goes on, it will slip and move to different dates if we're going by the Gregorian calendar, as we're doing here, and trying to understand how it worked back then in relation to what we are common with today. And jumping down to page 302, there's more on this 100-year period here. You can see on March 26, I highlighted there in yellow. In 427 BCE, the new moon was sighted on March 26 also. So that became Nisan 1. But notice going down here, you see a third time here in highlighted in red, or let's see, that's the second time in the 100-year period, was on 416 BCE. Look at how Nisan 1 is April 23rd. You notice on all three of these times that it happened, if you add 23 days and then there's the 5 days before March, from March 26 until the end of March, you have 28 days, right? You just add the math, there's 28. That means the new moon was sighted either 29 or 30, you know, a day or two before the spring equinox, the vernal equinox, which is why they added a 13th month. And with software programs like Herb Selinsky exposes here, is that it was the day before. So there was 29 days in these 3 months, these 3 time periods during the 100-year period, when a month was added because it was a day before the equinox, and when it landed on the equinox or afterwards, it was never added. It was only 12 months. Unlike modern Karaite Jewish calendar, the Babylonian calendar never used barley or any agriculture to help determine the beginning of a year, every year for that matter. And of course, the climates being different in Iraq versus Jerusalem or Israel, and even Israel itself has microclimates, as some of you know. But this is why the Karaites I know in modern times were about a month too early in 2018. They were just going by the barley. When they determined a certain stage of ripeness in the first new moon, they started the holy days a month too early, and that's including Nehemiah Gordon and Michael Rood, who's influenced by him too much, and as I believe, and perhaps as a result of climate change, you know, maybe that's why they're starting a month earlier than usual. There's crop manipulation that causes things to grow faster, and et cetera, as I pointed out in part 3 of this video teaching. And well, did they realize or target a certain stage of barley in Israel somewhere growing faster in 2018? I don't know. I can't say. That's a big question I have. To not be too different from modern majority mainstream Judaism, right? Because Judaism, the Jewish calendar, the modern calculated one, was a month too early also in 2018. So the Karaites are already considered a tiny little religious Jewish cult, and by Judaism. And so you just don't want to be even more different. You try to avoid it when you can rationalize it and be in more in alignment. And of course, Karaite movement being a lot smaller than even Messianic Judaism, for that matter, because Messianic Judaism has been growing like leaps and bounds and awakening. Regardless of motives and reasons why they started too early in 2018, their barley oral law conclusions are not compliant with the Tanakh. Certain sections, they can interpret it and make it seem like it is, but not according to the 7 Babylonian month names and the calendar system as it was used, and as pointed out in part 3 of this video playlist series, and even if you watch part 2 and part 3 as well. As expressed with more detail in part 3 of this playlist video series, the modern purely calculated mathematical calendar of Orthodox Judaism, and even all the different forms of Judaism that split off from that, from Reformed to Conservadox to and so forth. They've all following the same calendar. It doesn't go by the visible crescent new moons anymore, and neither does it go or rely on the vernal equinox to occur on or before Nisan 1. It rather relies on a complicated 19-year time cycle of the moon, very complicated, to add a 13th month during fixed years only during each 19-year time cycle, 3, 6, 8, 11, 14, 17, 19, and so forth, but which on average is an error on 4 years within each of their 19-year time cycles. That's 2 years every decade. They'll be a month too early, as I've pointed out in part number 3. That's not according to lights in the firmament, as we see in Genesis. We say Bereshit 1:14. I'm going to review this quickly in case if any of you are watching and have not watched parts 1 through 3. And this will hopefully stimulate you to learn this in more detail. Not according to the commanded seasons of equinox to solstice as expressed in Exodus 34:22, that Hebrew word techufah. I'll cover that in more detail with Shane Nelson in a future video. I'm just mostly trying to stick with the Babylonian calendar and how it's compliant with it for almost 600 years of archaeology and history, and comparing that with Josephus and Philo. Historians of eyewitnesses, historians during the time of the Second Temple. And when you realize this, it's kind of useless for modern Judaism to cling to their Babylonian, those pagan month names, because their modern calendar monthly timing is not the same timing anymore, usually, most of the time, as with the ancient Babylonian calendar since 499 BC, or their own Second Temple Jewish history, as we can see from Josephus and Philo, as they recorded it. And also, it's useless because the Babylonian calendar today, it's not in any cultures today. It's not utilized by any world cultures, not commonly known. Therefore, it is purely tradition to utilize these month names today, with no practical applicable meaning or inspired purposes to them, as it was during the time of the Second Temple time period. As we can see during, as I pointed out, 2018, and also this upcoming year, this year of 2021. And for this year, 2021, their so-called Nisan 1 will begin on March 14th. That's like 6 to 7 days before. And later, March 20th, we'll have the vernal equinox. And so Passover is scheduled on the 27th, and that's only 7 days after the equinox. And then Sukkot, if you look ahead on Sukkot, they will begin that on September 20th, but the fall equinox is not until like the 22nd. It's a couple days after the fall equinox, or they will begin Sukkot a couple days before the fall equinox. And that's not according to scripture. And we see in Exodus 34:22 with Josephus and Philo and historical information that's supportive of that as well. Also not compliant with the ancient Babylonian calendar month names, as we see in these years I've exposed here and express from 2021 and also 2018. Not the same timing regarding the months and the years anymore, all the time. So in conclusion here, thank you for hanging in there with me if you have, and for those of you who have, and if you haven't, please go back and read it. It's easy to kind of skim through and jump through things quickly. But for those of you who are very zealous to keep the weekly Moedim, as they're also called weekly Sabbaths, Shabbat, are also Moed, singular Moedim, plural. And you don't even want to be 1 day, not even 1 or 2 days off accuracy, such as I don't want to keep it on Friday or Sunday. I want to keep it on the right anniversary, the right cycle, the right appointed time as he's made holy. Well, why not be consistent with the annual Moedim? That's what I ask and propose to you, if you haven't already. Why give Orthodox Judaism authority to change times and seasons over the past 1900 years, but not Orthodox Christianity? If you're not going to give the leaders of our in our faith of Messiah not give them authority to change. Why give the Orthodox Jewish people authority? For the same day appointed timing accuracy, when the information is become available, when enough accurate information is available to disqualify almost all the other proposed biblical calendar systems, to help weed out the confusion and the too much of inaccurate information, the wrong interpretations, the counterfeit calendars, many ways to word that, with the ancient Babylonian calendar system as a missing connection, like a missing link in a chain. We need a lot more information. I'm not saying this is the only thing, but this is very important. It's supportive. I propose it as supportive information that goes along with the scriptures, perfectly compliant, and also Jewish history, 2,000 years of it, including Josephus and Philo, to restore our Creator's sacred, divine calendar for his annual anniversaries. We call them anniversaries of great things of the past, but they're also rehearsals. Like we're rehearsing, like a wedding rehearsal, trying to get it right, trying to get it more accurate, and to be ready for that day, to be clothed with righteousness, and accuracy is part of righteousness, not all of it. It's not just knowledge and truth, but love and wanting to do what's right and to loving others in the right ways, but not condoning error or inaccuracies either, but trying to walk this walk balanced. But like in an intimate, would I say, spiritually romantic relationship with him. Right? Many people say, oh, I got a relationship. That's all that counts. I don't need a checklist. I don't need to obey more accurately. He loves me anyway, and I'm good enough. I'm rich and increased with enough information and knowledge, and unity is more important. Well, there is a scripture and a commandment in the Torah to not follow the majority into error. When you know it's an error, why support error just because it's for unity or to follow the majority? We can see many examples in the Bible where the faithful ones didn't follow the majority into error. So many examples. Just go through the Torah portions. You see so many there, and throughout the prophets and also the New Testament. We say the Brit Hadashah, the New Covenant writings. But in conclusion, also, may I add a little disclaimer here, why not observe both calendars when you want more unity for double annual holy days during some years? Okay, we can see, is it Nehemiah, they observed a double set, not just 7, but made it 14 days because they had the right heart and the right motives. So we can see that it's okay to do extra and above and beyond the call of duty when we've got the right heart and the right motive, but we don't want to ditch the accuracy and the truth either. But what I say is try to keep both if it's better unity with those you love and those you can gather with. Yes, more unity when it's possible with others who sincerely even differ from us. And to simply lead by example, which is the best form of leadership for that matter, is to lead by example. And as he set the example for us, coming down in the flesh and dying and setting that example of obedience and walking according to Torah, that we want to walk as he walked, as our Messiah, our Savior walked. And the Father, never forgetting or leaving him out of the picture. He's always the greatest. So just trying to keep that in mind. Also keep in mind, as many people celebrate anniversaries, wedding anniversaries with good relationships, good marriages, also birthdays with more people. Often will target the closest weekend or the closest time when everyone can get together with more numbers and more unity for a celebration. Yes, that's not always the same exact date. Sometimes it's got to be on a weekend to include more people. But notice how the closest intimate family, those who are the closest in that relationship, we like that word relationship, a good relationship, we like those exact, accurate dates of birthdays and anniversaries, and maybe you don't, but at least anniversaries of really good, happy marriages. And regardless of the others and regardless of the majority, they can't get together with us on those exact dates. Well, we can make it another date, but then there's the intimate relationships that like to be sentimental and more romantic with the exact timing. Well, such expresses my faith and my intimate romantic relationship with my Maker, the Most High, yes, regarding His annual and His weekly Moedim. Baruch Hashem and Shalom Alechem.